And joining us now on the debate, Karen Stintz, Toronto City Councillor for Ward 16 in Eglinton Lawrence. Denzel Minnan-Wong, Toronto City Councillor for Ward 34 in Don Valley East. Nelson Wiseman, Political Science Professor at the University of Toronto. John Lawrence, Toronto journalist who specializes in urban affairs. And Ivor Tossell, who writes about online culture and urban affairs for the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Standard. Good to have everybody around our table for this discussion on Rob Ford 1 year later. To you first, Karen Stintz. Let's get some general impressions. How's he doing? 1 year in.
Yeah, no, I think Rob Ford was elected on a change platform, and he's delivering change. And change is hard, and but largely speaking, I think he's delivering on what he said he would do.
Ivor.
Rob Ford was elected on a simple message, and I think we're discovering a year in that change isn't simple, and the simple solutions he proposed don't actually work in reality.
Denzel.
I think Rob's learning a lot, but generally heading in the right direction and making the tough decisions that previous municipal governments weren't prepared to make.
John.
I think that he's encountering a lot of resistance, and I think a lot of many people in the city are very kind of concerned about the direction of council, about the partisanship, and the general sense that they're not quite sure which direction they're going.
Nelson.
I don't see much change. It seems to me the budget hasn't been dramatically slashed. Streetcars haven't been pulled off of Queen Street. The war on the car continues, according to Rob Ford. So for me, it's really a frustrated regime so far.
Well, let's see if there have been accomplishments. Karen Stintz, what would you look at on a checklist and say, okay, I'm putting a tick in the box beside that? He promised it, he did it.
Well, he promised that he would deal with the councillor expense accounts, and that's been done. He promised he would slash the motor vehicle registration tax. That's been done. He said he was going to outsource garbage. Council just voted to do that under Councillor Minnan-Wong's leadership. So there's been a number of achievements that have been made. There's more to come. The budget has not been tamed. We know that. And so there will be some hard decisions to make in the next coming months. But certainly I think that there has been a process that has been transparent, although sometimes bumpy and noisy. I think there has been a process that is unfolding that is transparent.
Denzel, would you tick off garbage privatization on that list of so-called accomplishments, insofar as when he pledged it, he said there are going to be savings of tens of millions of dollars, and it looks like now the savings are going to be about $11 million.
The savings over the term of the contract, if we exercise both two-year options, is $100 million in just 1 quarter of the city. So that's quite significant.
Over what period of time?
Over 9 years. So
that's basically what I just said. It's $11 million a year as opposed to the tens of millions of dollars a year that we were certainly given the impression would be there.
But that's only for 1 quarter of the city. If you expanded that over all the districts, that would be a significant amount more, which is actually an indication of the capacity to look at innovation at City Hall, to not just look at one way of doing things, and looking at the private sector to bring services in where it makes sense.
So John, if you, again, for people who live outside Toronto, Yonge Street's the dividing line. West of Yonge Street, they've got some garbage privatization, which will realize the savings they hope that he's referred to. Is there any appetite that you've been able to pick up to expand privatization of the garbage collection to beyond west of Yonge?
Well, I think that the garbage privatization issue came up because people were very upset about the strike in the summer of 2009, and with justification. On the other hand, the other municipalities that have done this, they'll do a mix of private and public to keep, so the two sectors keep each other honest. And it was done in Hamilton for the past several years, and what's happened is that there's almost no difference in the price between the private sector contractors and the public sector employees.
So they haven't saved very much money at the end of the day? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it sort of levels out at about equal. So, the promise that one is much more efficient than the other doesn't seem to bear out. Having
said all that, the list of accomplishments Karen Stintz gave, they are there. He did promise those things. They have been done. Is that worth something?
I think it's a bit of a stretch to equate privatization with innovation. It's an ideological shift, and he did do these things that he said he would do, but accomplishing these items on a checklist is not the same as moving the city forward, and it's not the same as achieving the kind of broader agenda that he wanted to, namely stopping a gravy train, which may or may not have actually existed in the first place, and transforming government in a way that probably shouldn't be transformed.
From what you saw, was there a gravy train, Nelson?
I don't know City Hall as well as my co-guests here, but this is a common line that people give when they run against incumbents, against the establishment. And you know, cutting the expenses for councillors is loose change if you've got a deficit of, let's say, $700 million. What are we talking about? We're talking about $10 million, as you pointed out, possibly over 1 year. We'll see. So, you know, I don't really see much change. Indeed, where the big differences would be is, okay, are we going to eliminate the land transfer tax? Even the Board of Trade, most of whose members I think supported Rob Ford, are now opposed to that.
Now, Karen Stintz, that land transfer tax he did promise to get rid of, and that brings in how many hundreds of millions to the city coffers every year?
Usually we estimate about 150 million, and it usually exceeds our estimates. So anywhere between 150 and 200 million.
And is it still the plan to get rid of it?
I think that the mayor has tempered his comments recently, and that he'll look for ways to fix the budget and perhaps phase it out. I don't know that we can reasonably eliminate it given our current financial situation.
We heard a lot about the gravy train a year ago. Was there a gravy train at City Hall?
Well, you know, I think that the gravy train can be a symbol for so many different things. And, you know, we're just 12 months into the mandate, all of us on council, but you look at some of the controversies, we'll go back to earlier on in the year at Toronto Housing. All that misspent money, you know, all the manicures and pedicures. You know, that's an example of some of these problems. And when you add up all these instances, for example, what we now know is the city has 30 more garbage trucks than it needs. Why? Because we can't get them fixed on time where the private sector can. That was in the paper today. That's an example where we need to learn how to do things better at the city, and that's this level of frustration that the broader public has that elected Rob Ford as mayor.
John, was there you know, as a metaphor for quote unquote cleaning up City Hall, gravy train not a bad metaphor to use?
I'm not a big fan of metaphors. I think that the problem we have is that, you know, a lot of people don't get the math. I mean, there are small dollar things that have been eliminated, and then there are larger problems, you know, about efficiency, like the garbage trucks is a good example. But basically, the city has a structural deficit. It doesn't bring in revenues what it needs to manage its assets, and the city's got a whole bunch of aging assets, you know, an aging subway system, aging streetcars, aging housing, and, you know, there's this gap. And what this administration has done is actually impaired the city's ability to collect revenues instead of, you know, finding ways to diversify. And that's basically the big problem in the situation.
I think we just made news here, and I just want to check that. You're a writer and you're against metaphors? Is that right?
I'm afraid so, yeah.
Okay, this just in, I'm going to take a note. Okay, let's, because we can't delay talking about this any longer. We got to talk about this. This hour has 22 minutes incident. For those who missed it, he gets ambushed at his home in his driveway by Mark Delahunty, who's a fictional character. We got a bit of video on it? Do you want to roll the video? You want me to talk over this, or does it speak for itself? Okay, roll tape, please.
Mayor Ford, it's me, Mark Delahunty. You know, I gave up all the old Princess Warrior stuff.
Can I go
but
to my
you know,
car, please?
Can I go
Mayor
to my
Ford,
car,
please?
I came up to give you a hand, honey. Because I gave up the Princess Warrior stuff, but when I saw what was happening to you...
Whoa, can I go to my car?
Oh, Mayor Ford, please. I came all the way from Newfoundland to talk to you, honey. One good thing about being stubborn, though, Mayor Ford, is you always know what you're going to be thinking the next day. God love you. Take care of yourself now. Didn't go that good, did it? I only came up to say, put the plug in the jug, keep the muzzle undug, and for God's sake, take the cotton wool out of his ears and put it in his mouth.
Okay, not seen in that video, of course, was the 911 call the mayor made immediately thereafter to the police saying, please get these people out of here. They didn't show up with as much promptness as the mayor would have appreciated, and there is some discrepancy over the kind of language the mayor used to the operators at 911 in the aftermath of all this. Question, Ivor, to you first. What does it say about how people in this city are prepared to see their mayor, given the reaction that we have seen from all quarters on this?
It puts Torontonians in a tough spot, I think. There is a guy on TV on the national news who is not putting a good face on this city. And Torontonians have been in this spot before, you know, a decade back. They don't like it. And this isn't the guy I think a lot of people thought they were electing mayor. I think they thought they were electing someone who was an easygoing everyman who was relatable in a sense. But running inside and calling 911, faced with something that perhaps isn't so threatening, is less relatable.
Karen Stintz, what does this say about how people are prepared to see their mayor?
Well, you know, again, I have to dispute some of what you're saying, because I think that the public had a fair image of Mayor Ford when he was elected. I mean, there was all kinds of media reports about his indiscretions in high school, about what had happened at the Leafs game. So, and he never shied away from those when confronted with it. And so, I believe that he didn't know who Mark Delahunty was, and I believe that it probably was inappropriate to show up at his door. And so, I think in light of all that, and in light of the fact, I don't think, I think people do accept Mayor Ford for who he is, and I'm not sure I would agree with your analysis.
You want to come back with it?
You know, I think that's actually a very good point in terms of the fact that we had YouTube in 2010. And it's a very good question as to why Torontonians either accepted this or chose to look the other way. And I might argue that it could be that people don't take municipal politics as seriously as perhaps they ought to. Because I'm not sure if we would have given a pass to, for instance, the experience at the Leafs game where he had an outburst against some other patrons who were there, or some of the outbursts that have happened in council over the years. We, as Torontonians, kind of gave a pass to that, and I wonder if people are going to think again.
But Nelson, this clearly seems to have separated people into two different camps. Some people say, how can the mayor not play along with this joke? Other people say, how can the CBC ambush him on his private property at 8 o'clock in the morning? What camp are you in on this?
Well, actually, I was very sympathetic to Rob Ford when I heard that he'd been ambushed like that, and my sense was he's probably never watched This Hour is 22 Minutes, which has since been confirmed. But what I think has turned off Torontonians is when you find out that here's a guy who then goes into his house, calls 911 3 times, isn't there when 911 the police show up. Also, it's clear he lied. He claimed he was there with his daughter, which also increased my sympathy for his situation. And then, the guy comes across as an inveterate liar. I think we should now have the record of what was on the tape. Why is he hiding? It isn't a matter of berating Leaf fans. It was a matter that he lied about it.
Denzel?
It isn't a matter of being arrested. It's that he lied about it.
Denzel.
So I think that there are 2 points to be made here. Firstly, the report that CBC gave was not entirely accurate when it first came out, and that led, the first story was the most salacious story that created this buzz, and people are interested in these salacious stories. The second piece that I think that's important to know about Rob Ford that we're learning, he's a very, very private man, and his home is his castle, and when you violate his castle, he's going to react very badly. And so it's okay at City Hall, but at his home, leave him alone. And I think that all of us who watch City Hall and are down at City Hall, when you look at the man, you can actually see how private and quiet and introverted he actually is. And that's not entirely apparent. Mel Lastman, for example, he was also a very introverted man, a very quiet man.
Not in front of the television cameras,
well,
but everywhere else.
He was a little bit different. But Rob is a guy that likes to keep to himself, and that doesn't always play to someone who's supposed to be the magistrate for the city of Toronto.
Let me follow up with you, Nelson, on something you just said, because when the word lie is used, my ears prick up a little bit. So, did he lie about the fact that his daughter wasn't out there with him in the driveway, or in the confusion of it all, he was mistaken?
That's true. He may be dissembling. I'm just saying how I see the tape. After I heard that his daughter was there, I believed him. This just reinforced my image. Remember, he was confronted about being arrested in Florida. He denied that. It came out, not only was he arrested for, I think it was drunk driving, he had marijuana in his pocket, and he was in jail for a while. Those aren't the kinds of things you forget. He said, I forgot it. Well, that's just not credible. In spite of that, as Karen pointed out, he got elected. People knew his faults. Well, he got elected, it seems to me, sort of on an idiot line, which sold, and he got blown into office on what Bob Dylan would call an idiot wind.
So a year later, we're seeing a picture that's painted, John, of a guy who comes in on the message of metaphors, which you don't like, and he now has this issue with CBC going forward. As an ambassador for the City of Toronto, capital city of Ontario, how's he doing?
Well, I'm not terribly impressed. I just want to sort of offer a comparison with what was going on last week when we were all obsessed with the Mark Delahunty stunt. In New York, Mayor Michael Bloomberg was just putting the finishing touches on a really interesting idea. He offered a bunch of city land and $100 million to any university that could come in and build like a world-class engineering facility in that city, which doesn't exist in New York. And so the deadline for applications was Friday when we were all talking about the 9/11 call. And now, I mean, Mayor Ford did not invite this camera crew onto his driveway last week, but I would really rather that we be having conversations about ideas like that rather than, you know, this stuff. And I think that
John, we don't live in that world.
I know we don't live in that world, but I think that part of the problem is that the Mayor Ford was, you know, he was good as a city councillor. He, you know, he attracted attention to certain issues, but there's a switch when you go into the executive office, and you have to. There's decorum. You have to play along with things. You have to not sort of hem and haw about whether or not to go to Panama to accept this flag. There's a whole bunch of protocol that goes along with the office, and you have to act like a mayor. And you know, I don't see that happening all that often. I mean, maybe when he comes back from Panama, I mean, he's doing well down there. You know, that will change, but that's what he has to do. He has to move to that space.
Karen, we've heard this said about other leaders as well. You know, some people thought Jean Chrétien on the world stage, Mel Lastman representing Toronto on the world stage. Do you get that same kind of when you see Rob Ford representing the city abroad?
No, I think Rob Ford was elected on a very different mandate. And as I say, I don't think there's much surprise about who Rob Ford is. And I think that he is doing what he believes he promised the people that elected him he would do. And so I think that those aren't the kinds of things that concern me as a member of council and as a Torontonian.
Okay. Our producer, Meredith Martin, who put this program together, made a compilation of Mayor Ford's promises. And they're on our website if you want to go check them out, tvo.org/theagenda. The promises are there. I want to just talk about a couple of them over the next few moments, and let's start and see how much progress he's made on them. You pointed out at the top he's made some progress on a few things. Let's talk about these two, starting with, Michael, if you would, roll tape.
My one point, my platform is 44 to 22, and why I say that is this city has 22 MPs, 22 MPPs, and 22 school trustees. We do not need 44 councillors down at City Hall. So I want to have everything just one, and one. It only makes sense. It will save millions of dollars.
Okay, that was the promise a year ago. Every riding, all 22 in Toronto, each has one member at provincial and federal level, but two here. You're not the only one from your Eglinton Lawrence. There's another one as well. How much progress has he made on cutting council in half?
Well, I have a theory about that.
Okay, go ahead.
When Mayor Ford was elected, there was the assumption that he would never win a vote on council, that he was seen as the odd man, the lone wolf. He'd not, if history is any guide to the future, he'd not want to vote at council, so why would he start when he's the mayor? And I think that that was a way of him, as a strategy, if he didn't win any votes, to come back to the people and say, look, I didn't win any votes because my council's too large. If you cut the council in half, I'll be able to deliver on my promises.
But he has won votes.
But he has won votes. So now it's more difficult. And I also think it was a reflection of a view of council, and that council wasn't a legitimate legislative body because of the decisions that had been made. And I think that council is restoring, I think, some of the confidence of the public, which will make it harder, I believe, to cut it in half.
That's quite a nuanced argument, Denzel, which he did not make at the time. He didn't say, if I win my share of votes, there will be no need to cut council in half. He said, we need to cut the number of politicians by half. How much progress is he making on that?
Well, yes, he's made no progress on that. But that being said, this is the first 12 months of the mandate. And if you look at all of the other things he's done, he's started a core service review. He's looking at efficiency reviews. There's going to be a review in terms of user fees. He's privatized garbage. He's made the TTC an essential service. We're going to be creating bike lanes, separated bike lanes. We're moving forward with that. First council that's done that ever.
Should council be cut in half?
It's an interesting debate to have. I mean, I think that when you compare us to the federal or provincial representatives, we do a lot of different things. I mean, one of the reasons why I actually think that 44 makes sense is there are 55,000 or 50-odd thousand employees at the City Hall. There are only 44 of us to watch over them. You cut that in half, it makes it that much harder to make sure that the city runs properly.
John, how about it? Do we have too many politicians down there?
No, and I think the problem with the mayor's promise is that he has to get 23 people to vote in favor of doing away with the other one's jobs, and so he's not going to be able to do that. And so it was never a credible promise, because it all turns on having sitting politicians vote themselves out of a job.
They did it at the provincial level. Provincial Tories voted to reduce the number of politicians in the provincial legislature.
But not by half.
Not by half, that's true, by a few. What do you think of this one?
Well, I'm not sure how much leverage, how much traction you're going to get by saying, look to your left, look to your right. One of these people's not going to be here next year. Yeah. But it was a kind of outlandish promise at the time. And there was a lot of kind of outlandish promises, not just from his campaign, from a lot of campaigns, you know, at this time last year. The whole idea that we were going to solve our budget problems just by attrition. Attrition had become the magical buzzword of the campaign, and there was a lot of promises that weren't really holding water, that a lot of observers were poking at and saying this doesn't quite add up. So I'm not sure how any of these promises were built to last, in a sense.
Nelson, would this council work better at 23 members instead of 45 members?
Let me put this to you. Toronto is by far the largest city in the country. It's larger than most provinces. Mm-hmm. New Brunswick has 700,000 people. It's got 58 MLAs. PEI has 40,000 people. It's got 30 MLAs. Manitoba has 1 million people. It's got 57 MLAs. And we're going to shrink Toronto to 22. I agree with Denzel. Representation is an issue. And also, if this is a conservative agenda, there isn't going to be savings in the millions. You know, I mean, maybe 2 million, 3 million. We're talking about a huge structural deficit. But isn't it ironic that here's Stephen Harper was calling for a trifecta. In the last 2-3 days, he's proposing adding 30 members to the House of Commons.
Okay, I hear you, but let me bring you back, you know, to the issue here, which is you've given me examples of other provinces that have smaller populations but many more politicians. What about other cities? New York City has twice as many people as Toronto and half as many politicians. Seems they get by with half as many for twice as many people. How about us?
Yeah, they do.
So is that an argument that we should do it?
No, what I'm saying is there isn't any hard and fixed rule. I'm persuaded by what Denzel is saying. He doesn't sound like he's on the mayor's side on this issue. I think it's perfectly reasonable to have one councillor for 55,000 people. I don't think Denzel is short of work.
Denzel, you're short of work? No, I'm kidding. I know.
These days I'm not.
Let's do the other big issue that I know Mayor Ford talked about when he was candidate for it at the time, and that was scrapping something that has been a policy in the City of Toronto for I think about 100 years. This fair wage policy, which doesn't matter if you're unionized or if you're in the private sector, you've got to offer what's called a fair wage to anybody who's going to get a contract from City Hall. The mayor said it ought to be scrapped. What's the status of it today?
I think that it's still part of the city's policy book.
It is.
And I think that, you know, I mean, there is a difference. You see this in the school board as well. You know, a significant difference in what contractors will charge public sector bodies compared to private sector clients, and that's, you know, a significant part of the city's cost structure. So it's an issue. It's a real issue.
Denzel, when you went for the garbage privatization west of Yonge Street, I think many people thought, here's the opportunity to get rid of this fair wage policy and we'll be able to get garbage pickup for half the cost of what is it, CUPE members charge?
That's correct.
That didn't happen. How come?
It's actually about, we saw a reduction about 30% of the cost of what we would pay. So 30% is significant. In terms of the fair wage policy, it speaks to a broader issue in terms of cost at City Hall, red tape at City Hall. You know, when you have a fair wage policy, you get a number of companies that actually don't bid, they don't compete. Far too often at City Hall, we don't get enough bidders on our contracts because they just won't go through the red tape and paperwork. You cut through that red tape and paperwork, you're going to get better bids, cheaper bids. City's going to save money, and we're going to be able to do a lot more to move the city forward.
So, Karen, the question stands: why hasn't Mayor Ford gone after this with the gusto that candidate Ford did?
Yeah, no, I think it's again a question of timing, and whether it's going to come forward as this round of budget discussions is something I don't know.
You have any idea why he hasn't brought it forward yet?
I think we're focusing too much on nickels and dimes. The issue here is not cutting waste. We all want more efficient waste operation. And of course, in every bureaucracy, there's some waste. But the big issues for a city that has a deficit of $700 million is you also have to think about revenues. Sooner or later, we're going to get tolls. Let's face up to it. Or we need to charge a fee to come into the city. This happens in a lot of world-class cities. So council has to get serious if it wants to address that issue.
Would you be for that, John?
I think that when tolls come up, it makes more sense to look at the GTA because you've got highways that are bringing people in, and you need to look at the whole area. I like an idea that's been touted in Calgary, of all places, where they're asking for an additional cent on all the GST. There's only GST in Alberta collected within the city limits, and using that to create a certain type of city facilities. They want community centers.
So they've asked the feds to do that?
They've asked the feds and the provincial government to do that, and they're saying we have a dedicated revenue stream. We're going to use the money for this purpose, and we're going to endow some money for operating funds.
So they're asking two Conservative governments to raise taxes.
They're asking two Conservative governments for permission to raise taxes within the city of Calgary, and that would be subject to a local vote. And so they're saying, we'll put it to the voters and see if they want it. And I think that Toronto should be looking at the same kind of thing for transit.
What do you think?
So, I mean, we did do that. If you remember, former Mayor Miller had this big 1 cent campaign. He wanted 1 cent of the GST. The problem is quite frankly, former Mayor Miller didn't have any credibility with the federal government because they didn't think that he was spending the money that he had efficiently. This mayor is actually trying to cut the waste at City Hall to build that credibility, so when he goes to the other levels of government and he makes an ask like that or similar to that, that he will be seen as a credible source asking for money when he's done everything he can to cut the waste at City Hall.
But he was asking for operating funds, right? Money to go into general operating. And what's being proposed in Calgary is that it's earmarked, so people know what they're getting. And I think there's a difference there.
I think ideas like that are reasonable and things that we have to look at to pay for capital. I mean, one of the problems that we have obviously is both on the capital and operating side. On the transit side is we just can't move forward because the provincial government has basically evacuated since Bill Davis's days and finally cut in the 1990s. We're going to need those funds to move forward both on the capital and operating side.
This provincial government is uploading more than $1 billion, I think, of former municipal services to its books now, right?
On some of the they haven't done it yet. I mean,
they're in the
things like
process
social
of doing
services,
Yeah.
But not $1 billion, not for the city of Toronto, not on
No, that's province-wide.
Right.
Province-wide. You're getting your chunk of change, though. You got $250 million coming to you, I think, don't you?
On the social services side, we're getting a chunk back. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is this? I mean, any of these ideas making any sense here?
There's no question, I think, that Metrolinx, as the regional transit authority, has to look at ways of generating independent revenue. And that may be tolls, that may be other ways of raising funds, but if we're ever going to build the infrastructure that we say we want to build and fund it, we're going to need a dedicated revenue stream beyond what the City of Toronto can provide and beyond what Queen's Park can provide.
So is that an acknowledgement that one of the first orders of business, naming getting rid of that vehicle registration tax, was a mistake?
I think it was, I'm not going to concede it was a mistake because I think it was one of the things that passed resoundingly at Council because we heard from the Torontonians that they didn't feel they should bear this cost alone. And so I think the lesson for us as a region is if we're going to have any of these solutions, they have to be applied across the region. And as the point John made, we need to be able to demonstrate where the money's going. And we weren't able to do that at Council.
But one of the things we need a better understanding of, I think, is, and Ivor, we heard this during the mayoralty campaign more than a year ago, the city doesn't have a revenue problem, we were told, it has a spending problem. Is that true?
That's an ideological point, right? That is a point which is actually, and I hate to invoke the specter, but it's lifted almost word for word from the Tea Party movement in the States, which is to say it doesn't have the problem is that it's bringing in revenue at all, and we've been having such a narrow discussion that has just not included revenue tools. We went through the entire core service review, and Torontonians were asked in a long questionnaire, what do you want to cut? What do you want to cut? Not what means would you be willing to, it was either, fee for service or cut it. So we're not having this conversation about bringing money in. It's just a one-point agenda, reduce.
course, if I recall the campaign, Mayor Ford, then candidate Ford, said at the time, we won't have to cut anything. There's such a gravy train right now, we just, you know, no one will see a reduction in services, we'll just cut the fat.
Well,
how's that turned out to?
Torontonians were very willing to embrace that kind of magical thinking. and it just, the numbers don't add up.
Now, when you say magical, do you mean magical or do you mean magical?
Well, I think magic is magic with or without the square quotes. Either way, not real.
Not real. What do you say on this, Nelson?
I agree completely. It was a fantasy line. If people were reacting to perceived waste by councillors. My councillor, I discovered, spent $12,000, you know, to thank his staff that he'd had, or the waste.
Who was that?
Kyle Ray,
or
Sandra Busson with her Blue Jays days, which then I discovered we, the taxpayers, were paying. She wasn't paying, but she was getting the credit. But if we're going to talk about these things, and let's relate it to Mayor Ford's behavior, I mean, one of the things he got credit for that I admired him is the guy bought his own paper clips. But let's now look at the behavior. A report comes out this weekend that he's having his business cards at 4 times the cost that it is for councillors, and it's being done by his own company.
Printed by his family business.
Right. Well, that suggests to me a conflict of interest. That sounds like gravy to me. But I admit it's not going to save a lot of money.
Karen, can you explain that?
Sorry?
The business card thing.
The business card thing or the gravy thing?
No, the business card thing.
Okay. Well, I mean, Mayor Ford, even when he was a councillor, he went to Deco Labels and had his cards printed. So
that's his family business.
That's his family business. And, but, you know, I wasn't aware that he was expensing that as mayor, and so I can't explain what changed.
Is that a problem?
You know, we have procurement policies that we can follow, and we're not obligated to go to the city printer. So in terms of the ability to go out and seek external quotes and have an external provider do your printing for you, that's completely within our policy.
So it's within the policy. Is there an optics problem when the external bidder you're going to is you?
I would want to hear from Mayor Ford on why he chose his family printing business to do his business cards.
Okay, let me say, it wasn't just his cards. He required all the people working for him on the staff to have that. So those are city employees. So it even goes beyond, if it was his personal cards, okay, that's one thing. But now you're commanding people that work for you to deal with my own company.
Denzil, is that a problem?
So my understanding, and I didn't read the newspaper reports, but my understanding of the information that I received was that they received 3 bids. They went out for quotation for 3 bids, and they took the lowest bid. But I can also tell you that if the mayor had his druthers about this, that he would have just had Deco Labels do it for free and passed and had it just delivered to City Hall. But the problem is that there are other individuals at City Hall that don't want him to have these free contributions made to save the taxpayers' money for some reason that beyond me that was made a few years ago. He would have just gone to Deco Labels, had them printed, and have the city not be expensed at all. But City Council won't let him do it, which is part of the insanity that goes on at City Hall, which is one of the reasons why Rob Ford was elected as mayor last time around. The public saw City Hall in the last election, and they were so frustrated with the wasteful spending that they just wanted to take some dynamite, roll it in there, and blow the place up and give City Hall a shake.
Has that happened?
I would say that most people would say yes.
Ivor, has that happened?
Well, we got the dynamite, all right, and what we got was more insanity. And so we're sitting here around this table talking about business card procurement, and we're talking about the mayor's reaction on a CBC's stunt tape. And this is what you get when you elect a mayor based on character and not based on policy. When you elect a mayor based on the fact that he had an attitude that resounded with Torontonians, that he had a very simple message, and people kind of said, yeah, I guess I'm frustrated now that you mention it to me. This is what you get. You don't get an administration that's based on progress. You get an administration that's based on somebody's character and trying to match up whether that character lines up with how he was elected.
I'm not sure this is a question, John, but you get the last 20 seconds here. A year ago, the mayor was at 60% in the polls, and Dalton McGuinty looked like he was going to be on the sidelines. And a year later, Dalton McGuinty is the re-elected premier, and the mayor's at 37%, which, funnily enough, was the same number Dalton McGuinty got when he got re-elected. A year's a long time in politics, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think that the City of Toronto is not a a right-wing kind of political environment. It tends towards sort of slightly to the right of center, and so his election was it was a recession election. A lot of people were nervous about their finances. People were angry with David Miller, and so it was a reaction to many things. But basically, I mean, we like our public services, we like our libraries, we like the TTC,
and we like low taxes too.
Yeah,
And we liked you for coming in today. Can I thank all of our guests for doing so? Denzel Minnan-Wong, the Toronto City Councillor from Ward 34, Karen Stintz from Ward 16, Nelson Wiseman, the poli-sci prof at U of T, Ivor Tossell from the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Standard, John Lawrence, Toronto journalist specializing in urban affairs. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.